And now, authors, writers, books, and beyond. This program also streams live on the web at tspntv.com and can be watched on demand at tspntv.com or TSPN TV's YouTube channel. And now, authors, writers, books, and beyond.
Hi, welcome to Authors, Writers, Books, and Beyond. I'm your hostess, Kathy Boyd-Valeur. And if this is your first time with us, I'd like to welcome you. I'm going to introduce my guests, Sarah Lunsford and Scott Thomas Anderson. And I'm going to talk a little about Hein & Company Bookstore that is right next to us. Wonderland for writers, readers, and really just about anybody. It has a upstairs and downstairs you can get lost in for an entire day. You can pack a lunch. They serve coffee and tea. You can hold critique meetings there. Sarah Luck-Pearson holds workshops there. And they now upstairs have Baker Street West, which offers for our community mystery murder theater. Woohoo! And a new production is coming up, I think, in the spring. So check them out. Go and ask anything you want. Rare, used, new books, calendars for Christmas. That's where I get mine. And a variety of props for drama, stage play, some amazing steampunk that is a new addition, and an assortment of magazines and CDs, DVDs, etc. So can't miss out. You go in there and I guarantee you're bound to find something, especially during the Christmas season. And you can't miss their Christmas lit book tree in the front. It's just beautiful. So Hein & Company Bookstore right next door to the studio here. Tonight, I am really happy to have two journalists / author writers with me, and I am thrilled for them to share with you the full extent of their writing. So I'm going to turn it right over, start with Scott, and just kind of tell us a little bit about what you've written. And
well, I started my career in Amador County. I worked as a newspaper crime reporter here for 5.5 years. I now work in the Sacramento area, but I've been a reporter almost 8 years now, and there was a period where I got a national grant to do a national project on the nexus between methamphetamine addiction and crime in rural areas across the United States. And so I worked as an embedded reporter with law enforcement agencies in 5 counties in California on that, and Amador and Calaveras were 2 of the counties that I worked on it in. So that all came out in spring of 2012 as a nonfiction book of journalism, Shadow People. Mm-hmm. And I'm just still working the crime beat in Placer County and Sacramento County now, and working on a new national project similar to Shadow People.
which had a huge successful launch at Clark's Corner. It was packed.
Yeah, the reception was great throughout the entire Central Gold Country, in El County, Amador, Calaveras, Tuolumne, Sacramento County.
And how far out did you extend beyond that?
Well, it's on sale nationally, but in terms of talks, I've done probably 80 public appearances. They've all been in California, all around the state.
Any help of that extending beyond the state? That would be great.
I'm so invested in the new project and trying to hold down a full-time newspaper job and do work for Sierra Lodestar and finish this new project on deadline that I can't really leave California unless it's for field research on the new book.
How about that?
Yeah. So I did some field research recently in Louisiana. I'm going to be in Illinois soon, and I'm going back to Louisiana.
Yeah, cool. Great. And Sarah, you want to tell us a little about what you've been doing?
Well, actually, I started out at the Amador Ledger-Dispatch many years ago, sort of as a little cub reporter person, and then went to the Calaveras Ledger-Dispatch and started actually covering local government, which I actually really enjoyed. I didn't mind sitting in, Board of Supervisor meetings and Angels Camp City Council meetings and that sort of thing. And I also, at that time, started a column about family life, which featured my son, and he was only about 2 years old at that time. And he is now 15 and a half, and people still come up to me and say, I remember that column, and I really loved that column, because they were able to relate to that.
How many years did you write that?
I wrote it for about 5 years.
So they kind of grew with him.
Yeah, so they did. So I think they really sort of related to, when he would put his handprints, dirty handprints all over the walls and, that sort of thing. So I would write about that. But I've written many, many different things. I ended up landing in feature writing, and that was where the Sierra Lodestar came in about 4 years ago. And since then, I've just had a book published about the history of the wineries of the Gold Country.
Did you bring a copy?
I did not bring a copy.
Almost brought mine.
But it was through Arcadia Press, and it covers from the 1850s to the 1980s, and sort of the trajectory of the wineries in the Gold Country, and
Was
the
that
history.
a fun one to write?
It was fun. It was fun. I didn't realize how much I had bitten off until I really, really started to do the research, because I went all the way from Placer County all the way down to Tuolumne County, and that is a wide swath of area, but I really wanted readers to view it as a region. I think many times we really cut it up into Tuolumne County or Calaveras, Amador, El Dorado, and really it's a region, and people can come through and experience the region. It's just a wonderful place to visit. So I wanted to encompass that in that particular book.
And how is that doing? I know they have it downstairs here, don't they?
It's actually doing quite well. And it's kind of hard for me to tell sometimes, but it seems to sell out on Amazon quite frequently. And friends have
Good.
told me that they've seen it in Barnes & Noble over in the Bay Area, so it seems to
That's
be doing
nice to
quite
hear.
well. It is nice to
Yeah.
hear, yes, absolutely.
And Sarah, for you TV viewers, was the guest reader for the Amateur Writers this year at the Autumn Leaves Read, and you read something different.
Yes, it's fiction. I write a lot of everything. I sort of hop from genre to genre in fiction, and then in journalism, I give my hats off to Scott, because I could never stand criminal journalism. But you enjoy it, and have done it for many, many years, and are very good at it.
I don't always enjoy it, but I've been reading a lot of George Orwell lately.
Oh,
And
yeah.
his journalism, not so much his novels, but his journalism. Whether he was writing about the British in Burma, or the Spanish Civil War, or even World War II when he worked for the BBC, he talks about this phenomenon of facing things, and by that I mean, what I think he meant was you have to have there has to be at least a platoon of journalists that are going to look at despair
Yes.
head on, and try to absorb it into themselves and channel it back in their prose, so it's not ignored. So it's not always fun though.
No,
You know.
no. But you've excelled at it and seem to be quite good at it.
Yeah, there's. I was talking to a crime reporter for the Mercury, San Jose Mercury, recently, and we were talking about just how few of us are left that specialize in crime reporting.
Yes.
This is Raheem Husseini at Sacramento News and Review, is a good friend of mine who also used to be a journalist here.
Yeah, he did.
In Amador
He was the
County.
editor, wasn't he?
He was the editor at the Ledger Dispatch.
Ledger.
Yeah, he and I go way back, and we still work on projects together for Sac News and Review. But it's a small group now. There's a couple people at the Bee. There's him. There's me for Placer County. It's a pretty small
Kind of a
pond now.
dwindling.
Yeah, well, that's the state of things, right? But it's important.
Very important. I think it's sad that it is dwindling, because I think it's important to have more on guard, I guess I would call it, than we have left.
To have people in the courtrooms or in the boardrooms, and it's sometimes just an offhand comment. I found when I was covering the boards, it's an offhand comment that sort of piques your interest, and that is what you follow. It's not necessarily what is actually happening right there in front of you, but it's something that somebody says to the side, and that opens up a door that you didn't necessarily know was going to be open.
That kind of leads me back to you before we go to break. Shadow People is what it is today, but what sparked your interest initially?
Seeing, so methamphetamine addiction is, it's a cancer of the human spirit.
Well put.
And,
Very well
but
said.
it has an external power in the sense that it affects a lot of people who aren't directly involved with it. And one thing as a crime reporter covering crimes in Amador and Calaveras, what I see day after day, week after week, living in the courtrooms, those two courtrooms, was it's not just the property crime that the addiction's driving. It's all these other crimes that are sort of invisible. Child abuse, child neglect, horrific domestic violence, attempted murders. Calaveras has had a number of them. And the nexus point that I realized probably 4 years into doing it full time was that when you followed not every, but almost every case back to its origin point, methamphetamine addiction was the origin point for all these different crimes. That was a story I wasn't really seeing in the national media.
Because it wasn't out there?
There have been a couple other reporters who have done stuff on meth, but not that narrative. They've looked at sort of different narratives.
I would like to go into that a little bit more when we come back. We're going to go on our first break, but I would love for you to join us and come back and hear a little bit more about that. And they have more to share about the writing they're doing now also. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in a little bit.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN. You're watching your local television network, TSPN, and now back to Authors, Writers, Books, and Beyond. This program also streams live on the web at tspntv.com and can be watched on demand at tspntv.com or TSPN TV's YouTube channel. And now back to Authors, Writers, Books, and Beyond.
Welcome back. My name is Kathy Boyd Fuller. Again, if you're just joining us, and this is Authors, Writers, Books, and Beyond. We all three are authors and writers, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about where my writing group meets. Clark's Corner in Ione, a wonderful establishment that was so needed in the community. I have the greatest respect for Craig Clark and gratitude for him bringing something that was lacking, that has a continually wider ranging, just a widening range of possibilities for the people in the community. This month, of course, there's a lot of focus on Christmas. I think they have some special Christmas things going on, the parades this weekend, and I'm reading my snowman story on the 17th at Storytime, but also showing the BBC movie, The Snowman, which is totally enchanting if you've never seen it. No words, just one song. But and again, another opportunity to offer to the kids in the community something different, something unusual. Try Clark's out for We Critique there. You can hold your meetings there. A lot of Rotary has their meetings there. You can go for buffets and just a sandwich, meet for a cup of coffee, cup of tea, and visit with friends. So it's 12 West Main Street in the 3-block town of Ione. And if you're watching this from a different place, we're charming. Come visit us. Give us a try. And we're going to go right back to where we left off. We had a very nice conversation over the break. I wish you could have heard, because that's when we have our best conversations. So Scott, you want to take it from where we left off there? We were talking about his book, Shadow People, and really how it is extending across our nation, not just here in the rural communities here in California.
It's devastating rural communities all across the western and southern United States. And the great thing about the grant was I would do 18 months of embedded work with law enforcement in California, but the grant allowed me to travel all over the country. So I went to Iowa, Nebraska, Georgia, Montana. It's just a different windows of different parts of the United States that have their own sort of special character in their rural communities, but are facing the same threat. It's not easy to get those communities to open up to a reporter who is working for Washington, D.C. and is from California. Because if there's
Mr. Hollywood.
Well, if there's one place they're suspect of more than California. It's Washington D.C. But
Double whammy.
being from the Central Gold Country is the only reason it worked, because I could have face-to-face conversations with these people and say, I'm from a rural community. I'm from a cattle community. I grew up around ranches, and grew up around rodeos. Like that's me deep down, and I'm not here to portray your community as a meth hovel or a drug den. I'm just here to try to figure out what you think is special about it, so we can make an argument that this is what is threatened by this catastrophe, which is what the meth epidemic is.
It is an epidemic.
It's an epidemic, and it's a catastrophe. Yeah.
That is really just robbing our nation of our youth, and not just our youth, it's generational in some places.
It erodes the whole foundation of a community on every level, because now you have grandparents raising their grandkids. Now you have a whole portion of your younger generation that can't work or won't work because their life is tied to this addiction, and it comes before everything. And the children who do end up staying in those homes rather than going to live with their grandparents, or rather than having intervention from law enforcement and child protective services, often they're living in a nightmare. And I saw it firsthand with my own two eyes.
That had to have been shocking initially for you.
Yeah, no, it was the worst part about the project. It's hard sometimes to just turn that off. I'm working on essentially a very similar project now, so I'm in total work mode. But I have recently, in the last few years, become a huge fan of jazz music, because it's one of the few things that I can play that makes me sort of just stop thinking about all those things if I need a break.
Well, it's nice to find, huh?
Yeah, I'm a
We all
huge jazz
have our
fan.
own little, I call it the escape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have one, Sarah?
No, not really. I sort of cruise around on the internet, and then I find myself sort of starting to do research. So, not really.
Do you
I
go on
guess.
Pinterest at all?
No, I don't. I have not
That's
even
a great,
broached
another
Pinterest.
addiction. It really is. It's eye candy, but a lot of people use it for research, for their books.
Oh, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. They do.
A lot
They
of
do.
pictures for research. Well, getting back to what you're writing, can you talk a little about your work in progress?
It essentially is a romance novel, or will become a romance novel. It's supposed to be a trilogy. This is the first one. And it's called Where Does the Chickadee Sing? And it starts out with the orphan trains, the tail end of the time of the orphan trains in the early 1900s. And it was interesting because the way I actually found out about the orphan trains was I was talking to another reporter friend of mine, and we were talking about the Civil War and the orphans that were left over from the Civil War. And then she mentioned orphan trains, and I said, I've never heard of those. What are they? And she told me, and I thought, wow, there's this whole swath of history that it sounded sort of fascinating, where you could actually take characters out of their home city, which would be New York City for my characters, and then place them into a completely different environment and just see how they would react. And so that was sort of the nexus for the beginning of the book. And the characters are so different because one of them, the main character, she sang, she has a beautiful voice, and she sang in a casino ship in New York City. And she's 13, so she's getting to that age where, as a girl in New York City, sort of on the streets, you don't really want to be there. So it was actually sort of a blessing that she actually gets put on the orphan trains and taken out to Texas, but she doesn't fully buy that, So it's sort of for me, it's interesting to write it just to see how the characters react.
And it's a lot of historical research.
It's a lot of historical research.
How do you deal with that?
I do a lot of internet searches, actually. What I have found is that the internet is an invaluable tool. There's so much out there now that you don't actually have to go to an archive to see all of the documents that you need to see. And so for somebody like me, that's fantastic,
You use a lot of the internet too.
For news reports, yeah. So when I'm tracking regional and statewide crime trends, certainly I go to good newspapers in other states to see if there's a way to correlate if they're experiencing the same thing. It helped immensely. Obviously, working on Shadow People is a national project, and I had to determine what states and what cities, well, I should say what towns I was going to, and who would help me out there. Yeah, it was.
that was an adventure.
I don't think as great as that grant was. I don't think it would have worked 10 years ago. It would have had to been twice as much without the internet.
Without
you
the
know?
internet.
Yeah, it would have taken that much more work and that much more travel.
How did the media, the current media today that we live in, help or hinder you with that? Into a more extensive level, as in also getting your book out, your sales?
Yeah, reporters have been interested, so that's been the big thing. Newspaper reporters and magazine reporters. I don't know, some of the interest is generated from maybe frivolous corners like the show Breaking Bad or the show Sons of Anarchy, or maybe some of it's generated by something a little more real like the movie Winter's Bone. But some of it's just newspaper reporters that are seeing this all the time in their own communities that say, okay, well, here's a national piece of journalism about it that speaks to our readers.
Is there a band of brothers nationally with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have fellowships, official fellowships under foundations. My grant was through the Phillips Foundation, which was the Robert Novak Journalism Fellowship. But I wouldn't. I mean, if there's a band of brothers, it's loosely knit, and it's just moral support at this point.
Kind of like a critique group.
Can you review things you're working on with peers? Yeah, you reach out to people. That's the newspaper reporters who really love their job are pretty generous with other reporters. And I've been getting some help from reporters at the Times-Picayune in New Orleans right now with my new project.
Wonderful.
And they don't need to help me. They just
choose to.
They choose to, sure. Like, not asking them to do it for me, but they pass along contacts, they pass along information, they point me to investigations they've done to compare notes to. So it's immensely
And
helpful.
that's one thing with journalism is that if you don't have any context and you need them, you can refer to another journalist, and it's not a big deal. It's not like they're holding that information tightly to their chest. They will give you the context, and they'll also tell you, well, that person's really difficult to deal with, so be careful. Or that person's
Goes
really
both
great.
ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, Scott, I was a stringer for the Ledger for 3.5 years, and Scott gave me the first. It was a review of Antoinette May's book, not the first one.
Secret Well.
Yeah, The Sacred Well, which is one of my all-time favorite books. And from that, they kept me on as a stringer to cover mostly book reviews and scholarships, school, anything historic, which was thrill for me. And because I was a freelance photographer, instead of shooting 2 or 3 pictures, I would shoot 20, 30, 40.
Yeah.
Just because I enjoyed it. But that started from you. And then he wrote the first article about my group back in 2007.
Lodestar.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Was it originally Lodestar, or was it, I think it was
Oh,
the
the
Ledger.
first one was the Ledger.
This one has a Lodestar article about the recent read, but the
Right.
beginning of the group, which was a phenomenal response, because he was what I called our liaison with the Ledger Dispatch for 4 years.
Oh, okay.
And it was very helpful to all of us. Some of the other writers did some articles, and I call it a brotherhood. I think that's the military, because my son has a band of brothers as a soldier.
Yeah.
Because it's really soldiering. I mean, journalists die on their job, folks. You are putting yourself in harm's way, especially with what you were covering. It is not a fluff job by any stretch of the means. There is a risk involved, and I think more so in our day and age, other than wartime,
Right.
than before, because I think this is I don't want to say our country has generated down, but it's just a more fearsome time, I think. I think we're seeing.
It's a more media conscious time.
It is
so
very much more,
especially in the last couple of years, is where I would write when I started. If I wrote stories about drug dealers and gang members in a newspaper article, chances are they would never even pay attention to who wrote it. Now I'm finding
they
this
do.
year, maybe it's the Sacramento area and how media obsessed some of the gang members are in Sacramento, but now they pay more attention.
That's true. Come back and you'll hear
true.
more after our break. Learn a few things, and maybe you might want to write in and leave some questions. We'll see you in a little bit.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN. You're watching your local television network, TSPN, and now back to authors, writers, books, and beyond. This program also streams live on the web at tspntv.com and can be watched on demand at tspntv.com or TSPN TV's YouTube channel. And now back to authors, writers, books, and beyond.
Welcome back. This is the third segment on Authors, Writers, Books, and Beyond. And once again, I'm Kathy with Sarah and Scott. And I really want to go right back into our break conversation because you're missing out on something pretty fascinating, hard to talk about, but I think truth is important. And we were talking about the need to hold back sometimes on the graphicness of what you're reporting. You want to take it from there, Scott?
Yeah, it's the most difficult part. When you're writing a book like Shadow People, you're faced with the decision of how real you're going to write real crime in a way that gets the point across to people of how horrific it is, without crossing a line to the point where it's pornographic on some level and reveling in the wretchedness or the misery those victims experienced. And it's a very tough line. It is a gray area that you can, a year and a half later, I don't have firm feelings on how well I did with it in terms of that gray area. It's mixed response. And what I was this week's an interesting week for me to be here because myself and Raheem Husseini have a front page story for Sacramento News and Review this week that involves a crime from Amador County. And he and I were faced with the exact same dilemma for that story. The story's called Desperately Seeking Justice. Anybody goes to sacramentonewsandreview.com, they can read it for free on there. Because I know the magazine doesn't distribute in Amador.
Before we go off here, repeat that later.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the piece is called Desperately Seeking Justice, and it's about a crime that happened last January in Plymouth, where a professional escort from Sacramento came to Plymouth to meet two men there, and she was abducted and tortured for over 12 hours, and tortured in ways that we couldn't fully get into in the article. They were so bad. And then they drove her to the Bay Area and threatened to kill her over and over, bringing her to bridges, bringing her to the side of the bay, telling her they were going to put her in the water. And so she got away from them. There's a couple morals to this story, and one is that at one point bystanders saw her and did not intervene. They saw her handcuffed, tied, duct tape with a blanket over her head, screaming for help, and this is in the Bay Area when they had her down there, and they did not intervene. They let these men drive away with her. So what I put on my Facebook when I posted this was, when you hear someone calling for help, you can get involved or you can walk away, but walking away can cost someone their life, and it nearly cost her her life that night. It's a story, I think, of Amador County law enforcement doing a good job. The Amador District Attorney's Office getting a successful prosecution. Both of these men are going away for 25 years to life, which is a development that just concluded a few weeks ago. Wow. So once that guilty verdict came in, well, they pled guilty. Once that was finalized, she was free to tell her story. But it's that same challenge he and I had of trying to describe all the different ways they hurt her without
sensationalizing it.
Yeah.
Because people like that today. I think they like that all the time, but today it's common.
You can almost, even in being accurate with it, you can cross the line so that people, they don't relate it to reality.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like you said, it's a very gray, fine line.
Right.
And if you go too far into it, it trips them over into, it's almost like they're watching a movie or reading a fiction. And you don't want that.
No.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, right. And so we wanted them to understand, we want the readers to understand why these people probably deserve 25 years to life, but at the same, or more, but at the same time, we don't want to give any people some perverse sense of enjoyment out of
Yes.
reading it. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult choices you have to make as a writer when you're handling those kind of things. And it's the kind of article that probably is going to elicit the same exact response as Shadow People as a book, is people in the Central Gold Country just simply don't know these things happen here.
No, I would like to think if something like that happened here, people would have responded. My neighbors we all watch each other's homes. We notice, you know what I'm saying?
You just
But
don't
you would like to
know.
think, you would like to think.
Yes.
But the citizens who did not intervene, that was in the Bay Area, just to be clear. They weren't Amador County citizens.
And I, you know, I think a lot of people would say they would expect that more there than here,
But I don't know.
I
I
know.
mean, human nature is human nature.
around
And-
the board.
Yeah, and you would hope that, you know, even if you're afraid because you don't want to get involved, I imagine that's the reason why people they would at least
Not
call on their
apathy.
cell phone, you know, get the license plate number
Yeah,
for the
they
vehicle.
didn't do that. They
See,
could
that's
have
what I
done
meant.
that.
Can't
you know.
They
understand.
can do that, you know.
When they brought their hostage back to Amador County, and when she escaped, she made it to a stranger's home in Plymouth,
Who
and
helped her?
they helped her. So the way the strangers to her in Amador County responded was a really positive part of the story. They responded with bravery and compassion. In a piece, unfortunately, that part of the story didn't make it into the final cut. The editors thought the piece was already so big, but I can tell you, if had it made it in there, people from Amador would have been proud about that part of it, about that part of the story.
That's hard. I know I write fiction, I started in nonfiction for 10 years too. And there's a need for truth out there, especially today. There's a lack of truth or not a desire for it. Seeing the truth of an abduction, someone cuffed with tape and a bag over their head is obviously in trouble if they're screaming for help.
Yes.
And you can choose, like you said, to ignore that or walk away, or risk yourself to do something. She was risking, screaming for help. She wasn't.
They could have killed her for that.
That's
And
what
they
I'm
said,
saying.
in
She took a
fact, they
risk.
told her they would if she did it,
And she did it anyway.
and she did it anyway, because she was convinced that she was going to die
Die
that night.
anyway.
And so, it's very tough decisions. As one of the nice thing about doing arts and culture pieces for Sierra Lodestar, which I still do, is it's a nice break for me creatively to not always be devoting all my writing energy into things that dark. So I like doing a weekly column for Sierra Lodestar about just arts and culture and music and food up here and things like that.
I think a break would be welcome.
That would be,
You have to have an equilibrium, right?
that's right, the balance.
And I don't know if you out there can see this. I mean, I know everybody in our county is familiar with these, but, I'm going to show them over here to Austin. Austin's camera. You got them? And actually, I think Sarah's cover stories, not your cover photography, but cover stories.
Yes.
And this little local magazine, folks, is a powerhouse, in my opinion. It is excellent quality writing and has kind of taken over our county, I think.
has.
In a really good way. I learned things I don't know about in the area I live in, and I've been here 15 years. You support a lot in what you write, scholarships and just about everything. I mean, I know there's a food column in here. There's something for everybody. And
I feel
think
like
so.
I feel like, and I'll let Sarah answer this too because she's one of the star writers for the magazine. But I feel like Mike Taylor's a great editor,
Oh, he's fantastic.
and
that makes a big difference.
I like
huge difference.
working with
With
him.
him.
He lets writers really write, and I feel like Sierra Lodestar is almost like a rural tri-county version of something more along the lines of SNR or SF Weekly, where there's more literary flair to the writing if that
Definitely.
writer wants to.
Yes.
But if other writers just want to write with a more direct voice, that's fine too. There's a lot of variety in it.
So you have a lot of freedom.
Exactly, and you're encouraged to develop your voice. And like Scott said, I think Mike Taylor, as the editor, is fantastic. And when I started covering the Board of Supervisors in Calaveras, he was covering the Board of Supervisors for a rival newspaper at the same time. So I've known Mike for a really long time. He couldn't wait to get out of that boardroom.
I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know why. I liked it, but he didn't. So it was interesting when we came back and started working on Sierra Lodestar together, and he's just fantastic. He really encourages the writers to have their own voice and tell the story the way that they view it.
If you're a journalist, a serious journalist, and you have a bad relationship with your editor, it's like a bad marriage.
It is.
I don't know anything else to compare it to. So
Probably very accurate.
yeah.
I know you guys did a panel too. The Lodestar did a panel this past year or the year before?
We've done several, actually.
Yeah, we've done a few.
Last
did.
couple of
We've done
years,
a-
which is really informative
yeah.
in the community. You've had good community response too.
Yes,
Yeah.
People seem to really love it. And they read it from cover to cover. They don't just read
all the way
the
through.
feature article or just the Amador or the Calaveras or Tuolumne. They read it all the way
All the
through
way
and they love it.
And that's a sign of, we're going to go on break again, really good writing. Come back and hear a little bit more in our final segment, and you'll get to know them just a little bit more before they leave the show. Thanks.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN. Local Television Network, TSPN, and now back to authors, writers, books, and beyond. This program also streams live on the web at tspntv.com and can be watched on demand at tspntv.com or TSPN TV's YouTube channel. And now back to authors, writers, books, and beyond.
Welcome to the December Authors, Writers, Books, and Beyond show. And we're just talking Christmas here during the break. Some interesting info from Alan I've never heard before. And you might wonder why I chose this instead of some, Dickens theme for Christmas. But I feel this is important, what we're talking about. Both journalism has gone through a tremendous change in America lately. And I think it's very important, the journalists that are still, I would almost say, crusading for truth today. I think that's really important. And a lot of journalists do go out into other genres of writing. And I think that's important too. There's a loss that's being felt within our nation for something of great value. And both Scott and Sarah represent that. And so we're going to go back to that. And I do wish you a very Merry Christmas. And maybe Alan will share some of his horror Christmas stories with you before we go. I said I had St. Lucia from Italy, nice and peaceful. But we're going to go back to the serious tone of the show, and I hope you understand the reasons why I chose this, and I think you will find it interesting. I would like Scott to give his website again before we close, and you can start with that by repeating it.
Well, the story that we just mentioned,
Right.
that's that Raheem Husseini and myself, both former Amador journalists, have on the front page of Sacramento News and Review. It's called Desperately Seeking Justice. It is about an Amador County crime. And you just go to www.sacnewsandreview.com and Desperately Seeking Justice. I have a journalism website. It's just www.scottthomasanderson.com, and it's just got highlight reels of different stuff I've done on it and public appearances, things like that. Yeah.
And you're both on Facebook, right?
Yes.
Do you
Yeah.
have a website you'd like to share?
I have an inspirational website. It's
Okay.
just sarahlunsford.com.
Okay, that's easy to remember.
That's very easy.
Can you spell Sarah, because not everybody spells it?
SARAH and then LUNSFORD.
Not a D,
Not a D.
L-U-N-S.
Yes.
F-O-R-D. And we're going to get back into a little of the other writing you do too, because Scott, you go from just like one spectrum all the way across the board to the other with some of your writing, because I've heard at the Reads you read some extremely almost poetic writing a couple years back. I would almost say you had a literary bent to that.
Well, I come from, or I'm influenced by the tradition of literary journalism, and one thing I say in the author's note of Shadow People, which I probably should say anytime I'm talking about the book, is how heavily indebted I am to Ernie Pyle, the World War II journalist, and David Simon, his two books that he wrote in the 80s and 90s, Homicide and The Corner, which are, for my money, the best literary journalism of the last half century, and also about maybe the best journalism ever written about the death of America's cities in all the different classes in America's cities, not just the lower class, the middle class, the working class, the longshoremen, the stevedores. They're really incredible works, and they're written with a more literary voice, which I attempted on Shadow People, but only the readers can decide if it worked or not.
I think the writing worked. And you're also an Oakley Hall fan.
I love Oakley Hall. Yeah, and so I was appreciated you sharing those memories of him for that magazine piece I did. So I'm a huge Oakley Hall fan.
Yeah, he brought a lot to our West Coast that we didn't have for writers to grow. He brought the East Coast to the West Coast, along with the others that began the Squaw Valley Conference, which I think is one of the greatest things that happened out here, personally. And that legacy is carried on by his daughters, Brett pretty much, and Sands, and his son until he passed away not long after Oakley. So, and I'm going to always say Mount Herman down in the Santa Cruz Mountains and Squaw Valley up here in the Sierras. If you are a writer, you're a beginning writer, intermediate, even an advanced writer, I highly recommend both. One's a CBA, one's an ABA. They offer editors, publishers, and agents for you to hear on panels, and you can take workshops and learn and grow, and you can't be a writer without that. Constantly honing our skills. We've never arrived. We are always perfecting our craft. And so it's really consider, and there's a lot else out here on the West Coast too, but those in particular are just two of my favorites. There's a lot of mini ones, like our own little, I call it our gold nugget in Mokelumne Hill that Antoinette May Herndon. It's her little brainchild and really gift to the community. It's what she calls it, a boutique conference, because she limits the number of people that can go, but you get a lot out of it. And they're in the process this year of building for the conference for May. And so you can go to Mount Herman the week before Easter, Squaw Valley the first week in July, and Mokelumne Hill the first weekend in May. So give those a try. And I've been to them. You were at Mount Herman with me one year.
Yeah, that was when we
Sunny.
first met.
Yeah.
Was Mount Herman.
I heard a lot about Sarah, but I hadn't met her
And you
yet.
said, "What are you doing here?"
I just walked into her, just literally, and I thought,
Oh, wait,
I know her, but I didn't know you were going to be there.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sunny Lockwood, another journalist, actually. She still does columns for the Union Democrat over in Sonora. She and I went to the conference, and it was the first time she had ever gone, and we both thoroughly enjoyed it. We weren't quite sure what to expect. We had gone to the San Francisco Writers Conference a couple years earlier, but Mount Herman was so different, and learned a lot, when I was there. And I started freelancing for Dayspring when I was there as well, and made that connection. So you can...
Which is big your first time there.
Which was big, yes, very big. And it opens up your mind to the options and opportunities you have out there. When you have a firm basis in journalism, you know how to tell a story already. And you know what it takes as far as inclusion of information to educate your readers, what they really need to know, because that's part of it, is honing it down, because you end up with so much data, so to speak, and just getting it down to a piece where people can actually read it and understand it. And the same thing applies to fiction writing too. You have so much background for your characters. What are you going to tell the people, when you're writing the story? But the the conferences really do help you with that.
What major morning workshop did you take? Do you remember?
I did the internet one.
You did?
Yeah, the internet one, which that's a lot of overload because, it's all about social media platforms now. And as a writer, you really just want to focus on your book and not on the social media aspect of it. But you have to be out there to a certain degree because people want to, in this world, they want to be able to communicate with you.
Who led that one?
Oh.
Was that Thomas?
Thomas, I can't remember his last name. Umstead.
Thomas Umstead. Boy, he's a genius.
Oh, he is, absolutely.
He's a total genius. There are just many options for you. I'm just naming a few.
Yeah.
And the local ones you just don't want. There's another real small one in Castro Valley that is phenomenal for a very small amount of money. Excellent classes. So you have a lot of options depending on what direction you want to go. As you can tell from listening to Scott and Sarah, they started in one place. You have a beginning, and you branch out and you grow and you keep growing.
Yes, you never stop.
No, you never stop. You have. You both are very young. You have a lot ahead of you still. Do you see other changes, maybe?
I
Well, that's a big question.
I'm totally committed to this national project I'm doing right now, which is very similar to Shadow People in terms of it being crime journalism, a book of crime journalism on national issues that tie very directly to this region too. So right now that's the only thing in my forefront and holding down my newspaper beat. But down the road I would like to do some a little more travel journalism. I just did a piece. I was in Greece and Italy for 17 days. I just did a travel piece on that. And that's a great kind of journalism to do. So.
Yes, it is. And that's actually, it's kind of interesting. I think in this line of work, you have these doors open to you that are totally unexpected, and then you sort of walk through them. And as far as travel journalism, I've always been interested in travel writing, but with my wine book, I had an opportunity to write a travel piece for a golf magazine, and then they brought me on as their travel writer. So it's sort of interesting how these things work.
The doors open and close.
Yes.
So obviously for this new project, I'm spending some time in New Orleans. So I'm going to be doing a travel piece
that
on
would
New
be
Orleans too,
yeah.
which I told you about earlier. My newfound love for jazz music. So
You'll be in heaven there.
yeah. Well, I was. Yeah. I mean,
What time of year are you going to go?
Well, I was there in April. I'm going to be back there again in May.
May.
Yeah.
Wow. I missed my one big opportunity to go there when my son was stationed in Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Louisiana's a
I thought I'd
beautiful
make
state.
it back, and I didn't.
No, New Orleans is an incredible city. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're winding down, so we have just about a minute left. I would like to thank you both for coming. I've really been looking forward to the show, and again, to our viewers, I know it's not your typical Christmas show, but I hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something and might take it to heart. You can always leave a message for either Scott or Sarah or even I here at the station. And we love to hear back from you. It's nice to know what you think of what we share, because your opinion does matter. It does count. And in closing, I hope I'm okay in saying this because something wonderful happened to Scott while he was in Greece.
Yeah, it's not a secret.
Scott got engaged to the lovely Stacy, and so congratulations
Thank you.
to both of you. I'm very excited for you.
Yeah.
That's a big deal, very romantic.
Well, if you want an excuse to go to New Orleans, that's where I'm getting married,
Oh,
Kathy.
is it? Oh, that's
Yeah,
wonderful.
you're totally invited.
Oh, thank you. That is so Scott and Stacy. Well, thank you, Sarah and Scott. We got to say goodbye. See you guys later. They like us to wave.
Oh.
So long. We'll see you in the new year.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN.